Hey there, I'm Chris Benetti, host of the Smart Author podcast. In this episode, I speak with Rowan Kunz of Art of Smart Education, and we discussed what it's like to launch a book and a business at 21. If you're currently fighting limiting self-beliefs around writing your book or are not exactly sure how a book can impact your business, then this episode will be perfect for you as it will give you the steps and tools you need to create a research-backed, peer-developed book that your marketplace actually wants. Some of the main topics we will be covering today include how Rowan wrote and self-published at 21 back in 2009, the effective strategies to use your book to dominate your niche, and why it may make more sense to go down that path as a business owner. At the end of this episode, please make sure you visit our website where you can find the show notes, plus the links mentioned with Rowan. If you enjoyed this episode, please make sure you subscribe so you're the first to know when a new episode is released. And if you're struggling with book sales, head over to smartauthormedia.com/audit to get a free audit and a clear plan to get your book sales back on track. Now, let's head over to this awesome interview. Hey, Smart Authors, welcome to another episode. Today, I'm joined by my good friend, Rowan Kunz. Rowan, how are you?
I'm well, thanks. Thanks, Chris, for having me.
It's my pleasure. Rowan runs a tutoring business called Art of Smart Education and is also based here in Australia. But I won't try to give Rowan too much of an intro. Rowan, would you mind giving everyone a 30, 60-second catch-up of what you've done in business and like why you've become an author?
Yeah, awesome. So, I run an organization called Art of Smart. We support, young people answer the big question of what on earth am I going to do with my life when I finish school, and how do I get there? We do that through a range of tutoring and mentoring programs and career and leadership programs for students, all designed to support them academically, do their best at school, as well as navigate, where they want to go for their life after, whether or not that's uni or another pathway. I suppose where I got started was really scratching my own itch. I struggled with that transition from school to life after. I thought I wanted to be a lawyer. I worked really hard to get into law school, got there and realized it looked nothing like TV. It was nothing like Suits or Law and Order, which was deeply disappointing. But then I was also, stubborn, and I sort of stayed there and did the whole degree. Spent 5 years sort of grinding through it and not really knowing where I was going to go. And I guess really through that realized that I wasn't alone, that so many other students had that similar journey of struggling through their final years of school and then not knowing, how to think through the next step of their life. And so, really just based on that own experience I had, wanted to go back and really support others. And I've been doing it now for more than 13 years and absolutely love it.
Yeah, well, I think it's so interesting because like even in that transition of you actually working into or getting your degrees or doing the education, you kind of discover yourself what you kind of think you want to do a little bit further. Like for me, I went straight from high school into doing an apprenticeship and becoming a tradesman, and I stuck in that industry for 5 years. But like by year 3, I'm like, this sucks, and then I'm like, I discovered business stuff. And then I'm like, I want to be a business owner. And like, that's pretty much what the last year of me actually being a qualified tradesman was. It was like, I couldn't care less about what I'm doing right now. And I want to just learn about all of this business stuff more and more. Do you find that's pretty common?
Yeah, look, I mean, it is. Like, I think a lot of people, you're 16, 17 often when you're making a life choice, right? About, career, really. Because at the end of the day, what you choose to do at uni or at TAFE, or in a trade it's a career choice, right? And that career choice, at least influences 5 to 10 years of your life, right? I mean, as you said, it was about 5 or so years, and uni's 5. And I think when you're 16 or 17, I think, let's be really honest, how much do you really know about life and the world, and how much do you know about what you like? Like very little. And so I think it's so common then that students, they get into whatever that experience is and then really start to learn more about themselves. I think the challenge is, whether or not you have the courage then to act on those sort of reflections and realizations you have. So clearly you did, you realized, yep, this is not for me, but the business is, but that's not an easy transition, right? Like, because the sunk cost fallacy, you've spent all this time already, you're finally starting to earn some money, like all of that plays in, and then you're sort of like, oh, I've got to go and start again. Like, ugh, really? So I think, it is a big challenge. And then I think for those that navigate it, like courage is such an important factor of that journey, in just having the courage, I guess, to listen to your gut and your heart for that matter.
Yeah, totally. So that transitions us pretty well into, Rowan, what was your after uni experience like, and how did you actually get into tutoring and mentorship and actually transition into building the business you have now?
Yeah. So I started while I was at uni. So I realized, okay, pretty early on, this career in law isn't going to be for me. But then there was just a void of what then, like I actually didn't have much clarity. And I started just, through word of mouth, supporting other students that were going through the journey. They were, maybe athletes or musicians or performers who were, struggling with balancing school and the other commitments in their life. And they were trying to work out how to take that and navigate and maximize their options. And I started helping them based on my own experience. And one, like, really loved it. I realized I could make an impact in another person's life in quite a significant way. And I think, ultimately, I think for a lot of us, that's where, career meaning and purpose comes from, right? When you can make an impact for the better. And I was sort of seeing that happening really tangibly. And I was, like 19, 20 years old. And that was really sort of addictive, to be really honest. Like, seeing that you could have that impact and being so young was like amazing to go, well, great, like, how can I do more of this? And that was sort of, I guess, what led me to then starting Art of Smart as a business, and as part of that, then, writing our first book, which was, this idea of like, okay, there seems to be an opportunity here to help more students in a more holistic way that isn't just all focused on the academics only, because to actually get through this journey, there's many bigger questions that we need to answer. And, that sort of led me to go, great, maybe the pathway here is to do this full time and to start a business. But then there became a lot of the questions of, okay, well, how do I do that? How do I, build a brand and a reputation so that more people want to work with me and, our business in a way that this is not just like a little side thing, it's a full-time gig. And then how do I build something that also, is going to encourage other people to want to join and work with us in a team? And so that was sort of where I got to in my final year of university, because I realized my parents would probably want me to get a job when I graduated. And so I sort of set a little bit of a goal, which was like, okay, I've got my final year of uni. How do I turn this into something that has legs so that when I graduate, I can tell my parents, look, yes, I'm not going to get a job at a law firm or a consulting firm because there's this other thing here that clearly, has got some potential. So that was a bit of a fun experience.
So how did you go from that to like the book's an answer for me to launch my business and, become that authority to build that reputation?
Yeah, I mean, I'd actually seen someone else do it. So, it wasn't like I was coming up with something unique, right? It was really just copy and paste. So there was a guy at the time, and he's still around today doing some great coaching work, Dale Beaumont.
Yep.
And he'd written like the secrets of, business owners exposed, secrets of internet, entrepreneurs, like he'd written a whole series of these books. And, what I'd seen him do off the back of that was write the book and then use the book to build a coaching business, really, at the end of the day. And what I was looking at was a coaching business. It was just a very different audience, right? It was high school students and parents and their families. But I realized that there was a pathway there to, be able to, use a book to very quickly, yes, build an expertise, or at least create a reputation of having the expertise in a particular area, and then use that to open doors. So I really looked at what, Dale had done in a different industry and went, hey, you know what? I think I can, copy and paste and make some changes. in that for what we were doing to really launch, Art of Smart at the time. So, it wasn't something that, I was particularly creative or innovative around. It was just really looking at what I'd seen work elsewhere and thinking, well, great. And Dale was sort of crazy, like he just didn't do one book. I think he did something like 16 books. And so for someone to lean into it at that level of commitment, it really told me, hey, like there's something in this. Maybe I should be paying closer attention to using this as a launch strategy for the business.
Yeah. Okay. And so like with that frame, obviously you're just finishing up uni, you're like ready to launch this thing or like, do this at the same time. You were pretty young, like 21, right? When you did the book.
Yeah.
So
21, starting 21, by the time it was published, I think 22.
22. Yeah. And okay, so like as a 21-year-old, what were the hurdles that came up? Like I could imagine that there would have been hurdles with writing or like even self-belief around writing a book. You're so young, publishing. Talk to me a little bit about that.
Yeah, so look, lots of obstacles and challenges without a doubt. I think one, there was probably, ironically, maybe less around self-belief. I know that, I think maybe it's as you get older, it's weird. Like, I think sometimes there's just a naivety when you're young, right? Yeah. Like you don't realize what you're doing is like hard and challenging. You just like dive in. And I think I had a lot of that, to be really honest, where I hadn't really, I didn't really sort of zoom out and go, oh man, this is really hard. And I think what helped in that was I'd seen, Dale publish 17 or 16 books at the same time. So, and I was really like reverse engineering that, right? So I think that just changed my perspective. It's like, oh, well, if he did 17, like surely one is like actually not that big. Simple and otherwise, right? But I think that was part of like mindset, at least, that I took. In terms of the writing of it itself, like I really did like copy and paste and adapt the strategy. So the strategy that Dale had used for those was he had found a bunch of experts in a particular area and then he interviewed them and then he put those interviews together as a book. And so I realized from my own journey that while I was able to help students individually, it could be hit and miss because I just genuinely didn't have all the answers, right? Like, I knew some things that worked, but I didn't know everything. And so what I realized was I'd go out and I'd basically spoke and surveyed hundreds of students to say, hey, what are your like burning questions that you want answered about the journey? Like, tell me what they are. And we got them. And then I shortlisted them into 50 burning questions that students had. And then I basically took those questions and went and found the 100 high-performing students that had basically done at the top 2% of Australia academic performance. And I asked them all of those questions. And then from there, I basically grouped it into, like questions and then answers. And so I got all of the responses and, created like what's the pattern here in the response? And let's write this. And so I guess that the reason I share that from a writing perspective as well is that it was less stressful from a point of like, oh, I've got to come up with something myself and I've got to have some secret sauce here. It was much more about, well, hey, like I'll just be the facilitator, and find the answers and then bring that together. And because it was targeted to the 50 burning questions that, students were having, I knew that it would really land. And because I'd gone out and then spoke to 100, high performing students, we had good data and great stories that we could include. So to be honest, like that element of the book, like that was probably the easier part. And again, a lot of that is because I'd seen it play out. I'd seen someone else use this strategy and I was really, just borrowing it and applying it. I think the more challenging parts really came with the fact that one, I initially thought, let's go and get this published with a publisher, right? And this was 13 years ago as well. And I should highlight that I think, Amazon has changed the game, right? In terms of, I think, enabling, individuals to print in high quality and to do more of the self-published pathway. So 13 years ago, there was, I think, still a lot more of a stigma around a self-published book. Like you could do it, but it was very much like the pathway is published, like go with a publishing house. And so I went through that whole process, and I found it really hard, just because each different publisher would have like a slightly different like form maybe of how they wanted you to pitch the book to them, and like writing like the book pitch documents. And I did all of it, pitched it to, I don't know, probably close to 20 publishers. I can't remember the exact number anymore. And, all of them came back either in just outright rejections or just no correspondence whatsoever. And then some were great in that they at least gave me some feedback. And a lot of the feedback was like, one, this is too niche. Like we want like something that's just got much broader like appeal. Can you make all of these changes to make the appeal a lot more broader? Or and then we'll guarantee it, then we'll reconsider it. So at that point, it wasn't even like hey, we'll publish it. And then the second major bit of feedback was like, look, and I had some people that I managed to follow up on the phone and speak to, and they're like you're 21, like no one knows you. You don't have any brand reputation, expertise. Like if we were to publish something like this, we're usually publishing someone in this topic that's like an academic or a researcher, or, and so really nicely they were saying, look, go get 10 years life experience, come back and pitch us a more broader book then. The final bit of feedback I got was, even if we were to do this, right, it's about a 2-year time horizon from when we go, yup, to when this would be published and come out. Which was just blew my mind, like I'm like, 2 years, like what? And they're like, yep, because we've got all these other books lined up ready to go already. Like you're going to the back of the queue, and then we're working our way through. And for me, that was probably the final really big killer. Like I was at that point still probably willing to maybe work through the audience or do some other things to see if I could get it working. But my really big challenge was I had a 4-month window to publish this book because I wanted to launch the business at February in the next year, and this is sort of like October, right? And so I'm looking at it going, well, if we don't have this book ready, like I can launch the business, but I don't really think it's going to get the cut through that I would like it to have, simply because we don't have this research that we can sort of point to say that we have this holistic approach that's backed by research that no one else has done in Australia, right?
Yeah.
And so for me, that was the real killer. It was like, all right, we just can't go with a publishing house. And that's when then it got a little hard because, writing a book and just putting words into a Word doc, right? Like that's okay. Thinking about cover designs, thinking about where you're going to print it, thinking then about building like a website to promote the book, like all of those things were all very new to me. Like I hadn't had any exposure or experience with it.
Even 13 years ago, sorry to cut you off, but like even 13 years ago, the web technology would have been pretty difficult to do and use. Like we don't have creative WordPress plugins or like themes to build off of back then,
Oh, it was building from scratch. Exactly. It wasn't like, yeah, great, we'll get exactly like a book author page WordPress template, pull it together, whip it up. Like to give you a bit of context, we built the book website with Flash, which, is clearly now, but at the time, right? Like that was like, the way that you would make websites incredibly engaging and pop. And so, it was like, okay, great. Like we've got to go to scratch. We've got to get a designer. We've got to build a website. And then, we've got to like write this thing and get it laid out. And in the end, this is, I guess, just how much of a novice I was at this whole thing. Like I looked at printing in Australia, but the costs at the time, because again, there was no print on demand stuff really at that point. The printing costs in Australia were astronomical. So I found a printer in Hong Kong, that printed it. Again, like I wanted to try to get the cost down cheap. So I was like, great, let's do like a 3,500 print run because it'll get the per unit cost down. Didn't realize what 3,500 books actually look like. And they literally turned up on a pallet and a half at my parents' house, right? Like organized it to arrive, and my parents like walk out the house and they're like, what the hell, where are you going to put this? Because it was just like huge. And then even at that point, like Chris, I hadn't even thought about how I was going to sell the thing short of like a website, right? And just trying to direct people to the website. Like I hadn't thought about distribution into bookstores. I hadn't thought about, like promotion into schools. Like I really was flying by the seat of my pants. Like the thing that I had known is book is good to launch business because of brand and expertise. But after that,
yeah. So I think a lot of people also, they get caught up in like, that's going to be the perfect solution for me, but they don't think about the aftermath. So how did you tackle that then? Like, how did you go from, okay, new business, new book to 13 years later, wildly successful? Like and then in the next following couple of years, like what did it look like for you?
So, yeah, well, I mean, having 3,500 books that have arrived that you've paid for on a credit card is incredible motivation when you're 22 years old and, you've got like all of this on your credit card and you're like, crap, how do I pay this off? Like, it's great motivation to like really get out there and start promoting. So I guess the first thing is I realized, and look, bookstores are, not as prevalent, unfortunately, now as they were then. Like Borders were still around. There were a lot more Angus and Robertsons and Dimmicks and so forth. My basic first strategy was to go, great, how do I find a distributor into bookstores and into schools? And so I went and again, just like got on the phone, started calling distributors, calling publishing houses, and found some distributors that were education specialists that could take it. Both into schools and into bookstores. And so that helped. That wasn't like the be all end all, but it certainly got the book. I could go in with Dimmicks and there it was sitting on the shelf, which was a really incredible experience for, like I was 22 and there's a book in a Dimmicks, right? At your local Dimmicks. But really from there, then it was like, okay, great. Like I've got to keep promoting this thing. It's not just like I've published it and it's there. Like we've got to keep promoting. And so like a lot of like local press, like let's get in touch with the local papers. Let's really utilize like just local media and media stories. And then I used the book to then navigate that into a weekly column in a couple of the local papers. And this is, again, local papers now, pretty dead, right? Back then, they were still really out there and, you'd read them, great distribution. But that helped because it was just about getting a name and an expertise. All of a sudden, I could say that I was, a columnist for a Fairfax newspaper, which, pretty cool. Again, like not many people can say that in any industry. And again, at 22, launching this business, it was particularly unique. And then where the book really helped was, really promoting it with anyone that was like engaging with us, even if they weren't buying the book, even if they hadn't read the book. We were being very, very clear that, hey, we've done this research, we've written this book. This is the reason why you want to come and work with us, right? Because no one else has done this. Like it's this really key differentiator. So that was a key part of just the sales conversations we were having. And then finally, we were sending the book out to schools and then utilizing the book because a school would get it and go, wow, this is great. This is great advice. It hits a lot of the challenges we see that our students are having. And then it created conversations about coming in to speak to students and to the school. Initially, that was like free. It was like, great, I'll come in and do a couple just to promote the book. And then very quickly, what was great about that was that turned into paid speaking opportunities, which was amazing because you were sort of getting paid to go in, share the advice from the book, but at the same time, build your brand with the target audience of, young people going through the final years of school. And that then led to like local councils and universities also reaching out to do paid speaking opportunities, which was again fantastic, to be able to say, hey, I've spoken at University of Technology, Sydney, or I've spoken at, Melbourne University, for example. And so all of that really then helped build that authority and that expertise that, in a relatively short period of time. I think that's the really important thing. Like I went from being 21, 22 publishers saying, hey, who are you? Like you're a no one that doesn't have any expertise to yeah, within 18 months, being able to say, columnist for Fairfax newspapers, like a speaker at University of Technology, Sydney, speaker at Melbourne University, published author, like it very, very quickly opened a lot of doors, and really opened the sort of the degree of expertise and credibility that I was able to bring to the business, and the business was able to then bring to the market.
Mm. So there's a couple of things here that I think are particularly interesting, especially from the publisher standpoint, because and going back to what you said earlier with the publishers saying like, this is too niche. It's like too niche in business is like kind of a really good thing. And it's like,
that's right. Publishers, that's what you
want. The publishers don't actually care about your business and what your model for the book Ascension is. Whereas that's like one of the main reasons why it makes sense for business owners to publish, right? And so with them saying that, like, that's interesting, because obviously, they have their own interests ahead of yours. Generally speaking, their goal is to sell more books, and their goal is to make money from selling books, because they don't see a percentage of your back end, which is where the book, generally will lead. And so like, they don't care if it's not niche enough. They just want to sell copies, right? So I think that's well, I don't want to put all publishers in a like under a hat, but like I think generally speaking, that's a good perspective. But yeah, like I think, man, like this whole journey is just so incredible, and a lot of the opportunities that have come up in business, like you went out and hustled for them. And it's like a lot of people will go like, oh, cool, like I'm getting a publisher, they'll organize that for me. And they're kind of just like, you pay a publisher all this money, just like you paid Hong Kong for all these books. And they're like, oh, cool, like they're just going to sort out like everything for me. Like I'll print with them, they'll do the cover design, they'll put me into distribution, they'll put me in front of the right audiences to do speaking and interviews and such. And then they'll market the book. And, generally speaking, I also think that there is an over expectation sometimes, or even the publishers do oversell that they'll create all these opportunities for you. And they definitely do the work to create some of the opportunities, but, Rowan being Rowan and, wanting to go out and succeed after having a big credit card bill, like that's a big motivation for you to go and make sure that you have success, not only with your book, but with your business. And, I think it has paid off quite well.
Yeah, no, look, I definitely agree. Like, I think, and I think the thing to look at, as well, is definitely niche is, like key, I would say, for, if you're publishing a book for a business, I think you're right on. The more niche it is, generally, the better it's going to be as a tool to build your business, right? So I definitely agree. Like, there can often be a conflict in, like, or a lack of alignment in interests sometimes between a publisher and yourself. But it depends ultimately on why you're publishing a book. I think you need to get really good clarity on the why. Like, why are we actually going to publish this book as a business? I think if you can understand that, then, yes, like generally speaking, there's probably going to be a lack of alignment if it is to build the business, right? Yeah. Simply because publishers, have other goals. And I'd certainly say that with because that was 13 years ago, like we've recently just published another book, again, to build a brand around a particular awards program that we run for students. And, it's been interesting to compare just how much has changed, right, in 13 years in terms of the tools that are now available to publish. And I think that also starts to sort of skew things, right? Because all of a sudden you've got incredible design and, distribution tools that enable you now as well to ultimately rely less on the publishing route. Like, there's less value that I think they can bring now, given the sheer availability of incredible tools that can support authors on that journey or businesses on that journey. And given the fact that anyway, at any point, you were really going to have to market your own book. Yeah. Like whether or not I think you're with a publisher or not, like you are going to need to market it. And so, I sort of looked at it and went, wow, like while even I think this time around, 13 years later, we probably could have gone a pathway to a more traditional publisher because we built a lot of the audience and the reputation and all the things that they told us we didn't have 13 years ago. Again, we realized, well, we're going to have to do the work. Firstly. Two, we want speed. We want to be able to iterate on this a lot quicker. We want more control over, the funnel and the creative, right? And then finally, we also want to then link this more closely to our business goals. And so I think all of those factors just mean that, I think, controlling the entire publishing process yourself can be really, really powerful.
And I must say, you guys have done a fantastic job at the controlling portion, because I'll link up the website in the show notes here, but Rowan's book website is amazing. His website in general is beautiful, but even the design of the book and the path that they've chosen to go down there is just all phenomenal. It's really, really well done. So you guys have done a bang up job on that.
Yeah, no, we have a great team, so I'm very appreciative. Yeah.
Oh man, the benefits of building a business.
Well, I mean, that's right. Because what I would say, is this time around as well. Definitely learned a lot from that first experience in what to do and what not to do. And then also, who are the key people that you want to get involved in the book project itself, right? And I think, I don't know if that's helpful to sort of share a little bit for your audience. But I know for us, what I realized, okay, we need to do is we need to get a designer on board, that's going to help us create, a great cover, really key. And we spent a lot of time looking at the thumbnail test, what does it look like as a thumbnail on Amazon? What does it look like as a thumbnail, digitally, rather than, the big blow up? Because again, that was just one of the key things we'd realized in the past, really important. How do we pass the thumbnail test? So great designer. And then, how do we get a layout done so that we can then lay the book out so that it looks tight and professional? And we took a bit of a creative approach there in that we used Canva to do all of our layout.
Wow.
Right. And yeah, unusual, but we've used Canva before. We've seen the power of the fact that, you can get a layout designed in it that looks tight. And then it also makes it easier for non-technical team members who maybe aren't, pros at Adobe, right, to come in and to then lay it out and to lay it out quite quickly. So we used Canva for our layout. And so, realized, great, we need a great designer to do that. And then, someone in our team, and we had 2 people on our team that sort of, worked at it, but someone to do the copy edit to make sure that it all, there's no spelling mistakes and it's making sense. And then someone to do the layout and to lay out the book, and in the process of doing the layout, tighten it and sort of ensure that, it wasn't overly long and it fit what was required. So yeah, zooming out, it's great. What we found is we need a great designer. We need, someone that, can be a great copy editor and someone that can support on layout. And, across the 3, we were able to, create the Trailblazer book came together. Actually, I should share this, right? Our first book, 3 months from writing, starting writing to sending it to the printer to ship, right? Very quick process. And with this book here, Trailblazer, pretty similar as well. It was a little bit over 3 months. So very quick periods of time. And so I guess I would just share that outside of hey, here's some of the key people that we found really helped us get a high quality book together. It also doesn't need to be an incredibly long process depending on how you go about the writing process.
Sure. Makes sense. So we are pretty much out of time right now. I've got so many other questions, but I'll be respectful of the audience's time here. Dude, thank you so much. And I got so much out of your story and just the lessons that you've gone through to get to where you are now and everything. Potentially, I'd like to even have you back as a guest again, just to continue talking about why the second book, why the third book, and so on. Yeah, cool. Because I feel like there's so much power in lessons from other people who have done the path before you. So, dude, thank you again for the time.
Yeah, no, awesome. Really appreciate it. Love sharing the story. So thanks, Chris. Great to be on. And yeah, love to come back at another point if it's valuable for your audience.
Awesome, man. Thanks again. What an awesome episode. If you enjoyed it, please consider subscribing on your podcast platform of choice so you get notified every single time a new episode releases. And if you're struggling with your book sales, head over to smartauthormedia.com/audit to get a free audit of your book sales to see where we can help you bridge the gap between not many sales to a lot of sales. It's a free resource call that we have together where I give you some clear action steps that you can take to take your stuff from broken to selling. I'll see you over there. Thanks again for listening.